where we have completed part 1. After that, if you haven't watched part 1, then watch part 1 first. The link is provided in the description. Let's begin without saying any more words.
The fact that dirty and run-down places like this make the best meals. Someone says, "What did you just call a dirty and run-down place?" It was the same old pub owner who said this. He winks at Frey and says, "I am glad to see you back." Frey then points towards someone and says there is one more person who has returned alive. The old man drops all of the food on his hand due to excitement. He shakingly asks, "Are you my son, Kazan?" Now we see that they are inside the room, and the old man is tending to the wounds of his son. And Frey tells him that they have done the emergency treatment and he will be fine. Isabel now asks Frey how he knows that he was the old man's son, and Frey tells her that both of them look the same, especially around their eyes. Frey tells Isabel that she has used a pretty good healing spell, and he says it looks like the drag of our team has some unexpected skills in healing magic. Isabel gets angry and says, "I am just asking to be sure, but who is this drag you are talking about?" But Frey nonchalantly says, "I am calling you a drag." Frey now tells me that he is planning on lodging here, but it looks like the house is full. The knight affirms and says there are so many customers that this must be a good pub. Frey tries to taunt the old man and says, "I apologize for bringing you all the way, Sir Luther, even though the sausages here are absolutely delectable." Suddenly, the old man started to act like crazy and told everyone to get out of the club right now. He even tells everyone that he won't charge them anything, so just get lost for now. The old man now turns towards Frey and says, "What do you mean by full? This place is absolutely empty." Now we see that Sonya is taking a bath, but she is carefully thinking about something else. On the other side, Frey is doing a stunt that we normally see in gangbang videos. Later, Sonya arrives there after wearing clothes. Frey greets her and says, "I've already started eating without you." We notice that Sonya's face is somewhat red as she goes toward her chair. Suddenly her leg slips, which makes her lose her balance, but Frey catches her and saves her from falling. Frey notices a huge number of scars on Sonya's hand. She quickly hides her hand, and her facial expressions become stern and sad. But Frey says that those scars look pretty cool. They are traces of your effort. Isabel, who is well aware of how much of a Riz god Frey is, changes the topic and says, "We heard that you were headed for Cascow, but what's your final destination?" And Sonya tells her that they are going to Jun's house. Both Frey and Isabel were surprised to know this and remembered what Peryuan told them before, that her fiancé is the daughter of the Aquareed house. Frey shouts and says, "You are the fiancé." And Isabel also compliments her and says she is the daughter of the Aquareed house. Meanwhile, Sonya was totally clueless as to why both of them suddenly got so hyped up. The knight asks, "Are you acquaintances of Lord Peryuan?" Isabel tells me that Frey and Lord Peryuan are friends at the same academy, and they heard about the engagement from him. Frey says Sonya is Peru's fiancé. He sure is a lucky bastard. On the next day, they prepare to depart for their respective destinations. Isabel hopes to make the rest of their journey peaceful. Sonya shyly asks Frey if he could come to Jun's house after doing his business. Frey easily agrees, and his riz starts to leak out, which annoys Isabel. Sonya smiles and says, "I will wait for you." Now we see that both Frey and Isabel are going into a forest. They then reach the Dumbledore's dungeon, which is situated on a tall mountain. The mountain was also known as Drake Mountain because a lot of drakes live there. Isabel gets scared and asks, "Do we have to fight against those in there?" Frey says it would be very nice if that were the truth, and he points at the ground below. We see the humongous footprint of a drake. Frey says that the Drake King is a few dozen times bigger than normal ones. Isabel gets very scared and says, "I have never heard of a drake this big." Frey tells Isabel to get her thoughts straight because anything could happen at this place. He suddenly activates magic and points it towards Isabel. Before she could say anything, she was thrown out due to the force of the spell. Suddenly, a huge monster attacks with a tree trunk where Isabel was standing previously. Isabel realizes that Frey attacked her to save her, and she was pretty shocked to see an ogre. This ogre had bloodshot red skin and 3 eyes, which signifies that it is a mutant. Isabel quickly uses her magic fireball and attacks the huge-ass ogre. Frey was glad to see that Isabel had grown significantly during this journey. But surprisingly, the mutant ogre came out of this attack totally unscathed. Isabel whines about her attack not being effective at all while being unaware of the fact that she has grown a lot stronger. Frey says that its skin gained a high resistance to fire magic when it evolved, probably because of the drakes. Isabel was surprised to know that the monster went into an attribute evolution. She asks what they are supposed to do then. Frey says if fire doesn't work, then you should use ice, and he summons a huge ass of ice. Isabel was shivering in the cold because, just by creating these 2 small ice spears, the surrounding temperature dropped as if winter had finally come. Isabel looks at Frey and says, "You really remind me of the great mage Lucas Trauman." Frey shoots the ice spear at the ogre, but the ogre strikes them back very furiously. Isabel notices that even a powerful ice spear didn't manage to completely pierce its skin. They ran away from the sight of the ogre and hid. Frey comments that not only did the monster experience attribute evolution, but its bones and skin were reinforced just like steel. Isabel says the ogre has super strength. It would be best to burn it down with fire magic, but its skin has a high fire resistance. Isabel suggests burying it alive using an earthquake like last time, but Frey denies it and says, how can you be such a musclehead? He says, are you trying to gather all the drakes here by using such a noisy, large-scale spell? Frey says there is a special well-digging technique for situations like this. He then goes in front of the monster and summons a bunch of ice spears. Isabel shivers in the cold and says, why are you using those ineffective ice spears again? Frey says you should only dig a single well to succeed. Frey shoots the ice spear directly at his forehead. He then continues to shoot at the same spot again and again, multiple times. Due to multiple attacks, the cluster of spears was finally able to pierce the skull of the ogre. Frey then points at the dead body of the ogre and says, did you see that, you dumbass? Is it best to just dig a single well? But because they have created so much ruckus, they have pulled the attention of drakes toward them. One of the dragons attacks them with fire breath, but Frey deploys a barrier to protect them. Frey then flies out in the sky and attacks with a very huge spear, which instantly kills the drake monster. Suddenly, the Drake King appears at the site, which surprises both Isabel and Frey. Frey quickly holds Isabel and hides behind the tree, because it's not an opponent Frey can defeat right now. Later, we see that Frey is meditating to quickly replenish his mana, and Isabel is also using her healing magic to heal his wounds. Frey has been fighting monsters here for the last 2 weeks, and his mind is now in sync with this new body. But there is still something that he has to do. He needs to go to Dumbledore's dungeon. Both of them then depart for the dungeon using flying magic. Frey warns Isabel not to deactivate the barrier because, considering Dumbledore's personality, it wouldn't be surprising if he kept monsters in this lake. Isabel asks Frey how he knows about Dumbledore's dungeon. Frey says that it was a habit of Dumbledore to always speak about how he would live in retirement. Isabel is a little confused as to how Frey knows about the habits of Dumbledore. They then land on an island because Frey tells them that this is their destination. Isabel was surprised to see how magnificent the island was. Frey says that Dumbledore is very sneaky. The dungeon is buried beneath this land. There is a dungeon many times bigger than the island itself. Frey looks at Isabel's expression and tells her that this island is just the entrance to it. Then they went towards a huge tree where the entrance was. They noticed that inside the entrance there are also stairs made up of wood, and there are also multiple magical torches present. They go deep inside the cave, and they get obstructed by an enormous door lit up with magic. Isabel asks, how do we open the door? Frey answers, it's a spell that Dumbledore concocted himself. If we try to open it by force, we will be obliterated. Frey then puts his hand on the sphere, which was the only thing present there beside the door. And suddenly a lot of speech comes out of that sphere. The smoke combined to form a little child flying in the air, and he asks, can you hear me? Isabel comments, what an odd thing it is, just who is he? But Frey just stood there in shock. The boy says, welcome to my dungeon. I don't know what you measly magicians are pursuing in this place, but you are still welcome. Frey tries to touch this boy, but unfortunately, his hands pass through him, which concludes that he is just a projection. Isabel says it appears to be a welcome message recorded using mana. Frey was trembling with grief, and with tears in his eyes, he said, just how many years did you cheat on your appearance while recording this message? You are supposed to be a senile old man. Still, it's nice to see you again, even in this form, Albus Dumbledore. The recorded projection of young Dumbledore says, what brings you to this place? Enlighten me, please. Because of the perfect timing of his replies, Isabel thought that they could talk to this projection. But the young boy says again, you can try to tell me, but this is just an automatic recording, so I will just say my piece. The young boy further says that no matter what you want, you will obtain it here because this place is my dungeon. Frey asks the young boy, how did you die? But the young boy says his pre-programmed words, which I obviously cannot send you inside without a little test. To enter the dungeon, you must give the correct answer to the question I am about to ask. With even a single mistake, you may not be able to escape this place for eternity, so beware. Frey looks at the projection and thinks my friend's voice and attitude are the same as back then. It's as if I have returned to times when we used to talk and laugh together. But my voice cannot reach you. I truly am the only one alive. Frey grits his hands and says, no, I am not the only one who survived. Those I loved and cared about returned to dust with the passing of time. But the ones who made us like this are still ruling this world as if nothing had happened. My enemies are still alive. The project interrupts Frey and says, it's uncool of me to drag this conversation out. Let's start with the question already. What do I, Albus Dumbledore, hate the most? Frey angrily says that the answer to this question is demigods. The young boy winks and says this is the correct answer. The projection now vanishes, and the door opens. Isabel was dumbfoundedly standing there, wondering how Frey knew so much about Dumbledore. Frey says we are in Dumbledore's dungeon. Considering his personality, it's definitely not an ordinary warehouse or anything. We don't know what kind of traps are waiting for us inside. Frey further says that if you stupidly stand still like that, you will be dead in no time. Don't you want to become stronger? Stop overthinking and focus. They then moved on to the next room to go more deeply inside the dungeon. Their path was again halted by a huge door, and Frey again put his hand on the sphere. This time, the projection that appeared from the smoke is of a young man's version of Albus Dumbledore. Isabelle comments that it's a young man this time, and Frey tells her he is also Dumbledore. And he further says that it appears that he ages every time we pass through the door. I have no idea why he is doing this, though. The young man says now is the time for the second question, but he suddenly remarks that he forgot to explain something. And he says, I have prepared greater and better items the deeper you head inside. However, you are permitted to take only a single item with you. If you don't follow those rules, our cult little golem friends will get quite mad. The young man warns of a single mistake, and out you go, so make sure to be careful. The young man now takes the name Iris Fistfounder and says, what an annoying woman. I can never understand the thought process of witches. Here we are struggling to save the world, and she goes head over heels for a man and doesn't care if the world ends. Frey was shocked to hear this news. Isabelle says Iris Fistfounder isn't the full name of the Black with Iris. Frey thinks about the Black Witch, Iris Fistfounder, and remembers her as a woman with ebony hair and a mysterious smile on her face at all times. The title Black Witch fits her totally because no man in the world could ever resist her charm. Frey says, I think I have never seen a woman as alluring as her. Guys, my maternal senses are tingling, and I have already fallen for her charm. I hope you guys can resist it. The MILF Devil also takes over the mind of Frey and makes him drool over Iris, but Dumbledore comments that Iris has her faults. But Lucas is even worse. How could he not notice Iris trying to seduce him? Isn't he supposed to be a great mage? Frey was totally shocked upon hearing the news that Iris was in love with him. Dumbledore says, how can someone be so dense when a woman is crazy for him? Isn't he supposed to be a wise magician? Isabelle thinks that Frey is the same as Sir Lucas in that aspect. Dumbledore further says, I bet that even a golem isn't as dense as he is. Oh, wait, let's ask the next question. Frey was angry as fuck upon hearing these comments. Dumbledore now says, Iris has a contract with 3 powerful devils and uses them to fight. One of them holds a different weapon on each of his 6 arms and embodies coexistence. But before he can complete his question, Frey says the devil's name is Asura. The projection disappears in the smoke after hearing the correct answer. Isabelle asks Frey, how did you answer the question even without listening to the end of the question? Later, we see that inside the room there are a bunch of jewelry, which are artifacts that could increase the power of the wearer. This time, the projection appears to ask the question of an old man. Frey realizes that the reason why Dumbledore's appearance ages the further they head inside is because this entire dungeon is Dumbledore's diary. After following this same process multiple times, they have already reached the 5th room. Frey says this is very odd. The questions aren't related to magecraft at all but are about bizarre subjects instead. Isabelle says you are even more bizarre for answering correctly to all those questions. Frey was utterly shocked when he reached the last room. The projection appeared this time as a very old man with a long white beard. The old man says Lucas Trauman was the great mage who was hailed as the strongest at the age of 40, the Grand Master of humanity. It's my life's greatest pride and joy to be able to consider him a dear friend of mine. Frey replies in a shaky voice, you are also my dearest friend. The old man says now is the last question. What is my full name? Frey now realizes why Dumbledore kept asking such weird questions because he was asking only those questions that only Lucas Trauman could answer. Frey says Albus Percival Dumbledore. The projection of Dumbledore starts to disintegrate into dust as he says, head inside. Everything in this room was prepared for you. Take care of everything, Lucas. Frey tries to stop him from disappearing, but his efforts are all in vain. Isabelle was utterly shocked because the great sage Dumbledore just referred to Frey as Lucas Trauman. Both of them now enter the last room, which was pretty normal. Isabelle commented that, unlike the previous ones, it's a cozy room where one could live. Frey looks inside a treasure chest, trying to find something. He takes out a very little bottle filled with sticky white liquid. Frey says that this is a frozen river. Isabelle was shocked upon hearing this and said, isn't that the Leadery solution created in the Wailing Cave, with 1 drop forming every 1,000 years? A miraculous elixir that can explosively expand one's magic channel, increase their inner mana, and instantly raise an ordinary human stage to 4 stars with a single drop. Frey compliments her and says she is as knowledgeable as ever. Isabelle freaks out and says, but I have heard that it was just an imaginary elixir. Are you saying that this sticky white thing is the frozen river? Frey says yes, and I absolutely need this if I want to reach the 7-star stage. Isabelle then goes and picks up some strange looking earrings and asks, what are these? Frey says these are typhoon earrings. I made those. Isabelle asks, how can something you made be inside Dumbledore's dungeon's final room? Frey says those are earrings I made 4,000 years ago for that sneaky bastard. I had nothing else to do, so I just created them and gave them to Dumbledore since he liked them for some reason. Isabelle comes closer to Frey and says, could you elaborate on what you said just now for me? Freed makes a stern face and says, I am Lucas Trauman. 4,000 years ago, Dumbledore and I rebelled against a demigod named Lord. I was imprisoned in the darkness of the abyss by a demigod and spent 4,000 years in it. But one day a voice pierced through the abyss's darkness and reached me. It was the voice of Frey Blake. I don't know how he called out to me or how our minds synchronized. Nevertheless, he spoke to me and I answered. Frey Blake gave me this body. He further says, I don't think you would believe me. Isabel agrees and says it truly is an inconceivable story. However, there were many cases where this truth was apparent. Oddly enough, this far-fetched excuse explains everything. Isabel bows down and says, I present my heartfelt greetings, Lord Lucas. Frey says, just call me Frey as usual. It will help me succeed in my goal. Isabel now picks up a bracelet. And this is very pretty. Frey tells me that this is the Great Sage Staff. Dumbledore used to use it like it was a part of himself. Isabel says this is a bracelet, not a staff. Frey takes the bracelet from her hands and says, give that to me. If you use it incorrectly, it might suck you dry of mana and kill you. Frey now equips both the bracelet and earrings, and a huge amount of mana starts to accumulate around him. Isabel was surprised to see such a huge mana increase. Frey says it's not my style to use magic tools, but it's a friend's keepsake. Isabel again takes out a little ball-type thing and asks, what is this? Frey looks at it and wonders if it is a golem core, but it has a tremendous amount of mana inside of it. Frey orders Isabel to pack all the things in their bag. Frey looks around and says all that is on Dumbledore's desk. Frey looks at the candle at the desk and says, a candle that burns for eternity using mana. Dumbledore always preferred creating useless stuff like this. Frey now takes a look at the notebook that was present on the table, and the first thing he sees written on the book is Lucas vanished. Frey starts to read his diary, and it is written as follows, I am certain that the demigod lord is the culprit other than him. There is nobody who can make Lucas disappear without leaving behind a single trace. What should I do? This isn't as simple as a single 9-star magician vanishing. He was the leader who united us. The last hope of humanity has vanished. Frey realizes that Dumbledore recorded the events that happened after his disappearance. The clash between the magic warrior Cassian and the Blade King Lucid. The sudden disappearance of the Black Witch Iris. The demigod's influence was already deeply rooted within the continent, and Dumbledore was standing in the middle of it. He was left alone, and he couldn't even trust his fellow humans. Despite other people's apparent admiration and respect, their inner thoughts were filled with malice as they aimed for Dumbledore's death. Within this diary, the terrible battles he fought daily were recorded in detail. Lucas read about his friend's life as he fought alone. Frey further reads, Lucas is our leader, someone who could never be replaced. I tried to bear his burden in his stead, but as time went by, every second showed the reality of my lacking skills and the emptiness Lucas had left behind. The last words of Dumbledore were, I am sorry, Lucas, I couldn't do it. Frey was shivering in grief and said, you moron, why did you get this far on your own? Frey further says, I only realized how lonely it felt to be alone. After experiencing my current life, Frey closes Dumbledore's diary and says, I shall inherit the loneliness you felt along with your will. Watch over me. I will definitely hit the demigod straight in the face. Isabel sadly looks at the Dumbledore's diary, and she suddenly notices something. She stops Frey and says there is another page left. The contents written on that page were as follows. To the one reading this, you must complete Anastasia. I have left behind all my records in there. In my greatest masterpiece, Anastasia. Isabel looks at Frey and asks, what do you think Anastasia is? Meanwhile, Frey puts his hands in the back and takes out the golem core. We see that the name Anastasia was inscribed on that core. As they were moving out of the dungeon, Frey said Dumbledore had reached the pinnacle of golem-making skill. For him to call it his greatest masterpiece, just what is this Anastasia? Isabel says if it's you, the mage Lucas Trauman, couldn't you complete the golem using this core? Frey stops at his place, and his face gets very angry. Now we go back into the past and see a weird-looking robot made by Lucas. Dumbledore was laughing uncontrollably after seeing this weird-ass golem. Dumbledore taunts him and says, don't make golems by yourself ever again. Just ask me to make them for you next time. I can make something better than this just by using my tongue. Lucas then attacks Dumbledore with a fireball to punish him, and that attack sends him flying. Frey then snaps back to reality and says if we complete this, we will get to know about the unrecorded history. Isabel asks, what is this unrecorded history you are talking about? Frey replies that everything that happened while I was locked in the abyss. Frey suddenly stops in his tracks, and Isabel asks him what's wrong this time. Frey angrily replies to Isabel as soon as we are outside. Head back to the village immediately. When they went outside, they were greeted by the Drake King Bastard, who was intently waiting for him. Frey asks the monster, are you waiting for me? But the monster doesn't reply. Frey again says, ask me, I already know that you are an intelligent monster. The monster laughs and says, yes, I was waiting for you, who fearlessly stepped into this mighty Torkunda's territory. Frey says you must have noticed us back in the forest. Why didn't you attack us back then? Isabel realizes that Frey's voice is shaking, and he thinks that she has never seen him this nervous before. The monster replies, I was waiting for you to exit that place. All those who exit that place have something good in them. Frey says he finally understands how you grew to be so big. You are hunting humans by using this dungeon as a trap. The dungeon my friend treasured more than his own life, and you have been using it to fill your insignificant stomach. Frey gets even more angry and says you need a little beating. The Drake King looks into the furious eyes of Frey, and he remembers his past. Inside his memories, we see that the Black Witch Iris had defeated him and warned him to stop coming after her. Otherwise she would kill her. The Drake King says to Frey, I don't like those eyes of yours. Frey tells Isabelle to leave as he is not confident enough to fight against him, and Isabelle says that's exactly why I shouldn't leave you alone. We see that the Dragon King is preparing his dragon breath, and he says people like you taste the best, allow me to eat you. On the other side, Frey infuses his mana inside that bracelet, which then converts into a staff. Frey then uses the earth wall magic and punches the Dragon King in the face. Frey then turns towards Isabelle and angrily says, don't you understand? You are a hindrance, you leech. She also realizes that she is being a burden just like Sakura, so she quickly moves out of there and says, I will be back as fast as possible. Frey now uses his flight magic to run away from the Drake King. But the Drake King also follows him while attacking him with the dragon breaths. A bunch of minion dragons also tried to stop Frey from running away. Frey then uses both the windstorm and the ice spear simultaneously and kills all of the monsters. Frey thinks that killing these small fries won't change much. I need to deal with the big guys to end this fight. He then starts to cast an explosion magic, but he needs 3 seconds to cast the magic, so he calculates the speed and flight direction of the Dragon King and perfectly places the site of the explosion right beneath the neck of the monster. But surprisingly, the monster came out totally unscathed from the explosion. The monster says your skills are amazing, but the power isn't enough. Frey realizes that he is in a very bad situation because in front of him is the Drake King and behind him is a swarm of drakes. Frey thinks that he is in very deep trouble and wonders, do I have to drink the frozen river right now? Now we see that a few hours ago, inside the dungeon, Isabelle Frey asked, why isn't he drinking the frozen river? Frey says, do you think this is merely an energizing tonic? Even I will need at least a week to control the frozen river's energy. Frey then tells me that I can't drink it here because we can't stay here for that long without food and water. Back to the present. Frey is fighting with the normal drakes and thinking that if I drink the frozen river now, it's basically suicide. Frey now gets trapped in the attack of the Drake King. But someone comes and hits the Drake King. It is revealed that the Phoenix was the one who helped Frey. Frey smiles after looking at her and says, you are bursting with health. The Drake King annoyingly says, don't interfere, you little chick. The Drake King and Phoenix clashed with each other, and Frey warned the Phoenix to run away. But he soon realized that the Phoenix had come here even after knowing that she couldn't win against this opponent. Frey says, are you trying to buy me time? Are you telling Lucas Trauman to escape? Frey realizes that his current self is truly weak because of his weak resolve. Frey then moves away from the battle site and goes inside the nearest cave. Frey then takes out the bottle of frozen river and thinks that he can't fear death because it's an everyday occurrence. He then proceeds to drink the sticky white liquid inside the bottle. Suddenly, he feels a lot of pain, and blood starts to come out of his eyes. Frey feels a hell of a lot of pain while trying to absorb the frozen river. On the other side, where the Drake King and Phoenix are fighting, the Drake King says, no wonder you looked familiar. You are the divine beast that escaped my grasp some time ago. The Drake King further says today is a very good day. The human who ran away was also good prey, but your tenacious life energy will fill my stomach so much more. Inside the memories of Phoenix, we see that he has been gravely injured by the Dragon King, and the Dragon King was planning to eat her. But the Phoenix gathered all of her strength and created a huge explosion, which hindered the sight of the Drake King. She takes this chance and runs away. The Phoenix somehow reaches the waterfall where Frey was training using the battling method. After that, we already know how Frey uses his newly gathered fire-type mana to heal Phoenix. Back to the present, the Phoenix is doing her best to fight the Dragon King to repay Frey's kindness. But as we already know, she is no match for the Drake King, and she gets pretty much beaten up. On the other side of the cave, the ice energy from the frozen river is going rampant inside and outside Frey's body. Frey knew that the burden would be heavy, but he never expected that this would be this difficult. Frey apologizes to everyone for wasting his second life all because of his pride and confidence. Frey says, I don't have the energy to absorb the elixir's power. As Frey was about to lose consciousness, he suddenly started to gain energy, and he wondered what was happening. He opened his eyes and saw Isabelle, and he asked her, why are you here? But Isabelle told her to refrain from touching his body as he didn't have enough energy yet. She points at the food and says, "Didn't you say you needed food and nutrition to absorb the frozen river?" Frey asks, "Did you go to the village and come back?" Isabel replies, "Yes, because earlier you said that you were left alone. I do not know what you are trying to accomplish in this world, but I trust you." Isabel then tells Frey not to say that he is alone anymore. Frey now realizes what he was lacking. What he doesn't have is resolve or courage. It is the struggle within those who are currently alive. The ice energy from the frozen river was so enormous that even the Drake King sensed it from the battlefield. The Phoenix uses this chance when the Drake King is distracted by the power of the frozen river and attacks him in the eyes. The Drake King gets very furious because of the pain and attacks the Phoenix with his jaws, slamming her onto the ground. The Phoenix was on the verge of death, but she still had a grin on her face, which made the Drake King even more furious. As he was going to trample and kill the Phoenix, suddenly a huge shockwave erupts from the cave and directly attacks the Dragon King. He was able to fly away and managed to stay safe from the attack. But the Dragon King realizes that this attack was very dangerous and wonders what is happening inside the cave. Another wave of huge shock waves comes out of the cave. But this time they are not only targeting the Drake Kings but also the other minion drakes. All of the dragons who got caught in the shockwave got freed to the point that they got covered in ice, and then the ice broke and they all died. It's the first time in the 1,000-year-long life of the Dragon King that he is feeling the emotions of fear, and his instincts are telling him to run away. Frey comes out of the cave wrapped around in an enormous amount of energy, and the Drake King realizes that Frey is the incarnation of fear. He uses all of his power and flies away as fast as he can. The Drake King himself was shocked, as he is afraid of a measly human. But suddenly, out of nowhere, Frey appears directly in front of Drake King, which made him fear so much that he almost spit in his pants. Frey then summons a ton of ice spears and attacks the Dragon King with all of the spears at once. The Drake King suffered only some minor injuries with this attack, and then he tries to locate Frey to attack him, but he isn't able to find him. Frey tells the monster that his arrogance has weakened him. How can a 1,000-year-old monster like him solely rely on his eyes? Now we see that Frey was standing, or we can say, floating, in front of the injured eyes of the monsters. Frey then summons a big ice spear and hits him again on the injured eyes. Now both Frey and the Drake King stand against each other, and the Drake King worriedly asks, "Are you even a human?" On the other side, Isabel thinks that Frey should drag this fight out longer because he is already on the verge of collapse. Frey then summons a gigantic ice spear. The Drake King says this attack has such overwhelming energy. Is this going to be the final attack? The Drake King also puts all of his power into his final dragon breath attack and says to Frey, "I don't know how you became so much stronger, but this breath of mine defeated the Phoenix, so a mere human like you with the ice attribute doesn't stand a chance against it." As the ice and fire attacks collide with each other, it creates a very magnificent and beautiful view on the skies of Aspania Mountain. Soon enough, Frey's attack became weaker, and he started to get pushed back. But we see that the reason why Frey's attack got weaker was because Frey was not present to put more energy into it. Frey appears above the Drake King and cuts his head off in one fell swoop using a huge Grim Reaper-style scythe. Isabel, who was watching everything, realized that Frey had instantly moved behind the Drake King and fucked him from behind. Isabel still couldn't believe that Frey actually killed a 1,000-year-old Dragon King. Isabel looks at Frey and thinks he did all this while being in an imperfect form. Just how powerful was Lucas Trauman in his prime? Frey then suddenly loses consciousness and starts to fall from the sky. Isabel quickly goes and catches him, and when she touches Frey's body, she tells Frey that his entire body is frozen solid. Frey tells Isabel to take him to the Phoenix. While they were on their way, Isabel told Frey that he was really incredible, as he defeated the Dragon King so easily. Frey says that the Drake King was lacking in battle experience, even though he was over 1,000 years old. Slaughtering humans and fighting properly are two different things. You need strength and tactics when fighting against powerful opponents. Frey says, "I made Drake King think that I was about to make my decisive attack with all my strength, but in reality, I used 80% of my mana to create the ice spear and the remaining 20% to move behind Drake King and make an ice scythe." When they reach their destination, the Phoenix had already breathed its last breath. Frey uses floating magic and picks up the Phoenix. He says, "The Phoenix saved my life, so I will revive him again." Frey takes the Phoenix near the dead body of the Drake King. Isabel was shocked to see that the flame energy within Drake King's heart was being absorbed into the Phoenix. Frey says that as a Phoenix, it can definitely revive with all this energy. Frey says now that the Drake King is dead, there will be a battle between the drakes of this valley. They will fight to decide who will reign over these mountains next. Frey orders the Phoenix to become the ruler of these mountains and protect his friend's dungeon so it doesn't get defiled by a second or third Drake King. Frey then bids him goodbye and says he looks forward to the day we meet again. Now we see that they are now inside a village named Cosphony. Frey is now almost fully healed and is sitting peacefully on a bench. Isabel arrives there and tells them that she had reserved a ship, but there weren't any ships departing today. Isabel gives him juice and asks, "How are you?" Frey tells her that he is fine but just needs to put on some weight. Isabel says the equipment we recovered from the Drake King's nest seems to be having an effect. The powerful fire attribute of the salamander's cloak made by Dumbledore appears to stabilize the frozen river's cold energy. Isabel then asks, was there a need to take all of the items within the nest? The spatial storage bag is almost full. Frey tells Isabel that they may be useless, but he cannot let his friend's keepsakes rot in such a place. Isabel tells Frey that the new semester is soon going to start, but this vacation was so long that it felt like a few years had passed. Frey winks and says they have only been in the mountains for a week. Isabel asks Frey's opinion about going to Lord Peruin's house. Isabel further says that his mansion is in this area, and they have to stay here for today either way since there is no ship departing today. Frey and Isabel then reach Jun's house. Both Isabel and Frey were shocked to see such a huge mansion. The gatekeeper asks them why their business is coming here. Frey nonchalantly asks if Peru is here. The gatekeeper asks about Frey's identity, and he just says that he is a friend of his and that his name is Frey Blake. We see that in the past, Peruvians told the gatekeeper that his friends could come visit during the vacation. His name is Frey, and he is the third son of the Blake family. If he does come here, treat him like you would treat me. At the same time, a carriage arrives there, and the soldier notifies her that she has returned. A very hot and beautiful lady comes out of the carriage and asks, "What is the matter here?" The gatekeeper tells him that a man who claims to be the young master's friend has come. The young lady greets him and says, "You must be Frey. I have heard a lot about you from my brother." The beautiful lady then points at Isabel and says, "You must be Lady Isabel." Isabel then asks her about her identity, and she introduces herself as the Peruin's little sister, Lilia. She then offers them a ride in her carriage to take them inside the mansion. Isabel was blushing, and she complimented Lady Lilia about her beauty and said, "Even though I am a woman, you take my breath away." The gatekeeper worriedly interrupts and tells Lady Lilia that they still haven't been able to confirm the identities of Frey and Isabel yet. Lady Lilia simply looks at the gatekeeper, which makes the gatekeeper totally bewitched by her beauty, and he quickly lets them in. Frey thinks that he still can't see the main building, even though they got past the gate quite a while ago. He wonders about how large this estate is. Frey then asks Lady Lilia why she is staring so intently at him. He asks her if she wants to say something. Lady Lilia says, "You are a lot different than the way my brother treated you. Your hair is white instead of ashen gray." Frey looks at his hair and says a lot of things have happened on their journey. Lady Lilia says, "Please speak freely. You are my brother's friend and also a child of the Blake household." Frey instantly starts to address Lady Lilia informally, which really surprises her. Frey then argues that she was the one who asked to speak freely. Lady Lilia then changes the topic and says that she has heard that Frey is attending Westrot Academy with my brother. She then asks how Peruvians perform at the academy. Frey brazenly replies that he has no idea, as Peruin is 2 years above him and they don't meet often. Lady Lilia thinks that if he is 2 years younger than Peruin, he is not that much older than herself. When they reach the mansion, Peruin was waiting there to greet them. Peruin greets them and says that he has been waiting for them. He then asks Frey if he completed his business, and Frey says, "Yes, I did it almost." Peruin then asks about Frey's changed hair color, and Frey replies that he tried to change his looks a little bit. Frey then tells Peruin that he is exhausted and starving right now. Peruin laughs and says, "I can see that even if you don't say anything." Lady Lilia looks at Peruin and thinks that she has never seen his brother smile so happily before. She taunts his brother. "I guess you don't care much about me, brother." Peruin smiles and says that's not true. "There is no way I would ignore our little princess." Frey feels very weird when he hears Peruin. Lady Lilia then says that Peruin didn't even care to ask about her while she was standing beside her, and then she goes inside the mansion. Peruin gets worried and says this is bad. "My sister often gets mad, but the reason is always a mystery." Frey again makes a disgusting face and says, "In my opinion, you calling your sister princess without any hesitation is even more of a mystery." Peruin asks about what he did in the mountains of hell. Frey asks him how he knows about their destination because he hasn't told him about it yet. Peruin says, "Didn't you save my fiancé in the mountains?" Frey gets confused upon hearing this, but Isabel explains that Peruin is talking about Lady Sonia. Frey smiles and says it looks like she arrived safely. Frey sighs and says Lady Sonia is still training her sword skills relentlessly. She is an incredibly hard worker. No wonder she got the title Rainstorm at that age. Frey agrees and tells Peruin this is true. She is being wasted on you. Frey asks Peruin where they are headed right now. Peruin say that it's a family rule for all guests of the house to greet the family head first. Peruin stops at the door of his father's room and says, "I will introduce you to my father." Now we see that Frey and Isabel are sitting at the dining table with all the family members from Peru. Peruin's father then says, "Nice to meet you, Frey," and then he asks about how Count Blake is doing these days. Frey says that he is doing well. Meanwhile, Isabel was terrified because of the aura from Peruin's father. Frey thinks that he is only borrowing Frey's body and has never met him before. Frey thinks that the Kejun family's head, Shepherd Jun, is one of the 5 7-star magicians of the Empire, and the master of the 4th magic tower. He might have some information about demigods. Peryuan's father further says the 6th magic tower is quite far away, so I can only meet with the Count Blake once a year during the magic tower conference. Frey looks at Peryuan's father's face and identifies the Dumbledore's magic tattoo. Peryuan's father shows his gratitude to Frey for saving his son and his son's fiancée. Peryuan's father asks Frey about what business he had in the mountains of hell. Frey says that he had some personal matters to attend to there. Peryuan's father asks to elaborate, but Frey says that it is a trivial thing that is undeserving of his attention. Peryuan's father laughs and asks Peryuan about how the preparations are going for the banquet. Peru says that everything is going according to schedule. Peryuan's father says many important guests will attend this banquet. You will personally supervise it as practice for the future. Fred then tries to ask Fred to attend the banquet, but his father interrupts and says there is magic, which I have personally researched recently. I would like to hear your opinion on it. Peryuan's father further says there is no need to feel pressured. I need a new point of view and ideas. I would like your opinion as a young mage of the newer generation. Peryuan and other family members then get up from the dining table, and Peryuan tells Frey that he will be waiting for him at the banquet hall. Frey tells Isabel to go and help Peryuan in his place. Now only Frey and Peryuan's father remain in the room. Peryuan's father gets serious and asks Frey to reveal his true intentions and tell him what he is scheming. Peryuan's father further clarifies and asks why the trauma rings have come to his estate. Frey wonders what trauma rings is, and he tells her that there must be a misunderstanding between them. Peryuan's father angrily says it was cunning of you to use Peryuan. Did you also hear that I would be present at home these days from Peru? Peryuan's father then points his finger at Frey and says, aren't you being a bit too arrogant? You are openly wearing those in front of me like it's nothing. Frey asks for further clarification, and Peryuan's father tells him that he is talking about the typhoon earrings. Frey then remembers the trauma rings in the club that Peryuan leads within the academy. Frey then says, I do not understand what you are talking about, your grace. I obtained these earrings myself in the Ospania Mountains. Peryuan's father asks, are you not part of the trauma rings? Frey says Peryuan did invite me to join it once, but I refused because I do not like being chained down to a group. Peryuan's father gets overly excited and says, I am not talking about the club Peryuan is leading, but about them. He stops midway through talking as he realizes something. He then sits down and says that it appears that I misunderstood something. You may let your guard down. Frey says, if you so desire, I will accept your grace. Peryuan's father asks Frey, just where do you think you are? Frey replies that he is at his friend's house. He further says, I have simply come here to visit my friend. With all due respect, I did not have an ounce of thought about meeting you, your grace. Peryuan's father says he doesn't fully trust Frey yet, but he will try to change his opinion of him. Peryuan's father asks Frey to tell his background, as he has to consider Frey one of them as long as he wears those earrings. Peryuan's father then asks Frey, who do you think is the master of the continent? Frey gets quite shocked when he suddenly hears this. Peryuan's father continues and says that among the nations founded by humans, the Cascow Empire must be the greatest. Even so, it is barely 10% of the entire continent's size. If the power of intelligent creatures on the continent can be gauged up to 10 fingers, then the power of humans can only be considered at 3 fingers. It would be difficult to call ourselves the masters of the continent with this much power. Peryuan's father gets a very serious expression in his face, and he says there is another master. The true master, a transcendent being who controls the continent from the shadows, the demigods. A semi-divine existence that transcends humanity. They are the true predators who control human society. Peryuan's father further says that this may sound like a foolish conspiracy theory to a young man like Frey, but there are such beings behind the scenes of this world. Now we see that Frey is shivering in excitement, and Peryuan's father asks him why he is suddenly laughing. On the other side, Frey thinks that there were only 5 of them. They were the only ones who put their lives on the line to oppose the demigod. Frey believed that the demigod had fully retaken control of this world, and that the people living here had no idea about the twisted laws and rules of this world. Frey was very surprised to know that there are still people who have this mindset, and that they have been increasing their numbers. Frey thinks, how could I not smile? For the first time since returning to this world, I see the light of hope. Peryuan's father asks Frey if he has prior knowledge about demigods. Frey agrees, and Peru's father again asks, how did he know? Frey calms down and thinks that he should reveal his identity even if this man is an ally. And then he says, I read about them in Dumbledore's note when I obtained these earrings. Peryuan's father again gets hyper-excited and says, are you really talking about the great sage Dumbledore's note? Frey simply nods his head to confirm his question. Peryuan's father realizes that Frey is telling him to share the information first. Now Peru's father says that the information we have about demigods is small and scarce. We do not know how many there are or if they even exist. Their ultimate goal is unknown. and we haven't found out why they keep acting behind the scenes without showing themselves. But there is one thing we are sure of. They are powerful enough to wipe every single species off the face of the earth on a whim and still have some strength remaining in them. Frey felt a little relieved because Peru's father knows at least the important stuff. Frey thinks that I am certain that they aren't numerous. There shouldn't be over 100 of them. However, each and every one of them is similar to gods, and they are similar to destruction. Peryuan's father now further says that 4,000 years ago, there were 5 heroes who stood up against demigods. They are famous people that everyone has heard of. Great Sage Dumbledore, Magic Warrior King Cassian, Blade King Lucid, Black Witch Iris, and Great Mage Lucas. But after the Great Mage vanished, history changed. A rift split the Magic Warrior King and Blade King apart. The Black Witch erased all traces of her. Guys really hope she will still be alive through immortality magic, and she will come later as a mega MILF to stand aside Frey. Back to the story. The Great Sage was the only one to remain and fight until the end, but he couldn't face the demigod on his own. With that, the names of these people became history. Frey thinks that what Peryuan's father told him exactly matches the events written in Dumbledore's diary, and Frey believes that he can trust this man. Peryuan's father further says that our circle is an organization that has inherited their will. Frey asks what a circle is, and Peru's father says, I generalize it as one circle. We are all separated and divided throughout the continent. As time passed, the will we had inherited was split up. We are in a situation where we are keeping each other in check. Frey says it always becomes political when 3 or more people gather. Peryuan's father further says we are divided into countless circles, but the most influential ones are Stro necklaces, Fistfounder armlets, and lucid swords. Frey assumes that these circles use the names of the past heroes, and he wonders what happened to Cassian and Lucas Trauman's named circles. Peryuan's father says I don't know much about the other circles, but I have heard that the situation for trauma survivors isn't very good. Apparently, the circle master died, and half of the executives joined other circles. Frey got pissed off after hearing this, but he controlled himself and asked, what about Cassian, the Magic Warrior King's successors? Peryuan's father says Cassian's title of Magic Warrior King is passed down to one person at a time, but we have no idea about their whereabouts. Frey asks, is the circle not related to the club at the academy, even though they have the same name? Peryuan's father says the club is something that those young students decided to create on a whim. When we discover some geniuses within the academy, we bring them over to our sides at times. But the students do not know about the existence of the circles. Peryuan's father further says it's actually better if there are other organizations with the same name as ours since we are better hidden and less likely to get caught. We never know where demigods' eyes and ears can reach. Peryuan's father says this is everything I can tell you. Now it's your turn to tell. I have heard the rumors about Dumbledore's dungeon in Aspania Mountain. Frey says I was lucky because I was in a difficult situation and ran to an unknown area, and happened to find Dumbledore's dungeon. The Peryuan father again got very excited, and he asked, did you find the diary you mentioned earlier in there? And Frey agreed. Guys, I think if Frey tells him a little more about him, he will die of a heart attack. Peryuan's father asks Frey how he can get there too. Frey says he cannot tell the location because he also found it accidentally. Peryuan's father says he still can't completely erase the suspicions he has about Frey. He also asks Frey to show the effects of the typhoon earrings. Frey activates the artifact, and suddenly a lot of mana gathers around him. After witnessing the artifact's power, Peryuan's father says that he wasn't suspicious of Frey just because he thought Frey was a member of the Traman Rings. There is a greater reason than that. Now the scene changes, and it's evening time, and a party is going on inside the Jun house. A lot of people belonging to the noble families had arrived and were enjoying the party. We see that Frey has dressed up pretty nicely, but he is standing alone in a corner, and he was thinking that he finally found someone who knows about demigods. But things actually got more complicated now. Frey says I need to find out more about the circles, learn to control the frozen river's energy, and complete Dumbledore's golem, Anastasia. Frey's head is starting to hurt because he has to worry about so many things at once. He then ponders the fact that it might not be a complete coincidence that he synchronized with Frey as well. Isabel arrives there and asks him what he is thinking about so deeply. She then shows off her dress and asks how she looks. She further tells her that Lady Lily especially prepared this dress for her. Frey looks at her and says, it must be so nice for you to be able to live without any worries. Now we see inside Frey's memories, where he was talking with Peru's father. He tells Frey that a month ago he heard a report during the Magic Towers conference that someone had gotten in touch with a demigod. Frey gets pretty shocked and asks who was the person who contacted the demigod. Peryuan's father tells us that the person is Isaka Blake, who is also the father of Frey Blake. Back to the present, we see a rat-like looking person trying to flatter another person by flattering him. The rat-type person was trying to manipulate him so that he could get invited to the Deer House's banquet. On the other side, Sonia arrives in the hall and goes to meet Frey and Isabel. Frey was intently looking at Sonia while they were greeting each other, so Sonia asks Frey, is there something wrong? Frey then points at Sonia and tells Isabel, this is what you call looking beautiful. Isabel asks Frey why he always acts mean toward her. While Frey and Isabel were nagging each other, we saw that Sonya was getting too blushy because of the compliments she just got from Frey. Frey looks at Sonya and says her face looks pretty red. He then proceeds to offer her a glass of wine, which he has already drunk half of. Isabel thinks that Frey is so dense when it comes to women's feelings. The rat-looking person arrives there and tells Frey that he had never expected to see Frey in a place like this. Isabel asks Frey if he knows this rat bastard. Frey tries to check his memories to find out who this person is. But before Frey could remember anything, the rat bastard said, "What an unexpected surprise. To think that I would see the trash of the Blake house here." Frey thinks that there is no need to check his memories because he is just a dick. The rat man says no matter how trashy you are, I guess you could participate in this banquet organized by Peryuin through the Blake house's connection. The rat man was very jealous of Frey because it was very hard for him to get an invitation as a concise aristocrat. The rat man further, you even managed to get into Westroad Academy through connections. The academy even though I couldn't enter. Frey stops his blabbering and asks him to get lost. Sonya then asks the rat man if he is close to Frey. The rat man says yes, he is very close. This dude isn't someone who is capable of talking back normally. The rat boy's attention now turns to Sonya and Isabel, and he wonders who these two super hot girls are. The next question that comes to his mind is, what are these two ladies doing together with trash like Frey? The Deer House noble arrives there and asks the rat man if there is any problem. The man introduces himself to Lady Sonya as the eldest son of the Deer House, and his name is Patrick. Sonya also introduces herself as Sonya Aquareed. The rat man hypothesizes that Sonya doesn't know what kind of man Frey is since she is from a foreign country. The rat man thinks this is perfect. He should use this opportunity to humiliate you once and for all. The rat man quickly apologizes to Sonya for not recognizing Lord Peryuin's fiancé. Sonya quickly turns towards Frey and tells him that the marriage is not set in stone yet. Frey asks her why she is telling him this. The rat bastard says, I am amazed by your consideration to greet every guest as the organizer's fiancé. However, Frey Blake is not someone worthy of your consideration and attention, Lady Sonya. Now we can clearly see the anger in the eyes of both of the hot ladies after hearing this. Now Patrick insults Frey by comparing him to his brother, and he also tells everyone that Frey has been banished from the Blake household. Isabel gets pretty angry at these remarks and says, I do not know who you are, but everyone in this banquet cannot even reach Frey's ankles in terms of skill. She asks Patrick to apologize to Frey. Frey pats her back and tells her to calm down. Patrick says that the person who needs to apologize is the one who invited this unworthy man to this prestigious party. Peryuin appears out of nowhere and says it looks like I have offended you. The one who invited Frey was me. Both of the bastard nobles were shocked after hearing the statement. Peryuin now sarcastically apologizes to Patrick for disappointing him. He further says I wasn't aware that I needed the Deer House's permission to invite a friend of mine. Peryuin says that Frey is the most valuable guest among all the invitees at tonight's party. The nobles started to frantically apologize, but Peryuin says there is no need to be so nervous. This place is my house, and you are my guest. Peryuin then goes near the rat bastard and says, but if this weren't a party, you would be dead by now. The nobles were so scared that they ran away with their tails between their legs. Frey comments that Peryuin is a lot more vicious than he expected, and Peryuin replies that he was just trying to imitate Frey. Frey says I am super gentle and kind. Peryuin says, have you ever used this thing called a mirror? Frey says that his reflection is so bright and shiny that he can't stare in the mirror. Peryuin asks if Frey started to get bald. Both Isabel and Sonya started to laugh after hearing them fight like kids. Peryuin now gets serious and says you are very strange, Frey. The strength you showed back on the Corteso. If the world knew of it, no one would call you the trash of the Count's family. Frey says that a man shouldn't go around and show off like that. Peryuin then asks Frey about what his father said to him. Frey says he was suspicious that I was part of the trauma rings. Peryuin thinks that Frey is talking about the club at the school, and he asks if Frey has any intentions of joining the club, which Frey denies. We then again go back in time to the memories of Frey, and here Peryuin's father tells Frey that the reason he could clear his suspicions of Frey was not just because he could use the typhoon earrings. There was someone else who guaranteed Frey's identity. Frey asks about the person who did it. Peryuin's father tells us that he was Heinz Blake, or his own big brother. Peryuin's father tells him that Heinz Blake is a member of the Stro Necklaces like him. He further says to Frey that he knows what your family did to you. You must have received countless wounds and scars. I am not in a position to say this, but if I may allow myself, Heinrich is different from Isaka and Michael. He agreed to your banishment for a different reason. Back to reality, Frey says I don't plan on returning to the academy. Isabel gets utterly shocked after what she hears from Frey. Isabel thinks that if Frey doesn't return to the academy, what would she do there without him? Perun asks Frey what he is planning on doing from now on. Frey says he is not sure, but the Duke, or we can say Perun's father, recommended he join the 3rd Magic Tower. Perun says that at the 3rd Magic Tower, the training curriculum isn't anything amazing, but the quality and quantity of the magic books they have are the best among the magic towers. On that night, after the party is finished, we see Isabelle being very upset while thinking about tomorrow, when Frey will leave for the magic tower and Isabelle will have to return to the academy. Isabelle thinks that deep in her heart, she knew this day would arrive sometime soon after she learned that Frey is Lucas Trauman. Isabelle then goes to the room where Frey and Perun are talking. Inside the room, we see Frey thanking Perun because he had a lot of fun at the banquet. Frey further says that the fame and prestige of the name Perun were quite impressive to see. You must be the genius of the century, born into the Jun house. Perun says I might be a genius because the day I first learned seize mana was when I was 5 years old. Frey asks the Perun if he is trying to show off. But Frey was also surprised by this information because even Dumbledore first sensed mana at the age of 7, which means Perun is a true genius. Perun says that he reached the 4-star age at the age of 17, but they wrote down on the official records that he was 20 years old at that time. Frey asks him why he did that. Perun's expression gets serious, and he says, Frey, I have never shared my honest feelings, but I will say this for the first time in my life just because it's you. I think of my talent as a curse. Perun now tells his story and says he once had an instructor. He was a 6-star magician and the vice master of the 5th Magic Tower. He was a knowledgeable elderly man with a white beard that reached his chest. Whenever I asked him questions, he would answer with a gentle and kind smile while patting my head. I used to love his teaching methods so much that I studied even harder to be able to ask more questions. He was the man who sprouted my will to study magic and enjoy it. At least, that was what I thought. It was not long after I reached 4-star. One day, I asked my teacher a question that even he couldn't answer. He was quite bewildered. He shouted at me and called me a monster. He was completely enraged. He had a face filled with terror. The teacher was watching me develop my abilities at a terrifying speed and was hiding ominous and sinister feelings deep in his heart. After that day, I lost my path and goal in life. I still enjoy studying magic today. But whenever I fully immerse myself in something, whenever something reaches the depths of my heart, that face keeps resurfacing like a curse and stops me from advancing. Every day, I curse my talents more than 1,000 times. Perun got very emotional, and he cryingly said that if I were ordinary instead, I would have been able to learn magic more passionately and enjoy it so much more. I wouldn't have been called a monster by anyone. Frey puts his hands on Perun's shoulder and sarcastically says, "Stop being so cheeky, you punk." Frey tells Perun to listen carefully, and he says there is a level that people with amazing abilities, who cannot even be labeled as geniuses because even the word genius cannot justify them, cannot reach. Even if they work tirelessly while vomiting blood until their demise, they will never reach that state. That is the pinnacle of magic. Frey further says that if you get unmotivated because you met an unqualified instructor and were the target of his jealousy, you will never reach the pinnacle. Frey then suddenly uses the name Demigod, and Perun reacts to this name like he already knows about their existence. Frey says, "I knew that you were also aware of their existence. The despicable god that controls all the intelligent beings in the world. It's humanity's fault for not being aware that they are living under his tyrannical rule, but humanity still has the potential to defeat him." Frey then looks towards Perun and says, "If your goal is to live an extravagant life at the Magic Tower and show off your skills, your current talent is more than enough. However, if you wish to defeat a demigod, your unique objective should be the pinnacle of magic." Frey proudly says, "My goal is the pinnacle of magic. What is yours?" Frey sighs a little and says, "I think a teacher isn't the only person who can help you find your path in life." "Are you telling me to find my own path in life?" Frey suddenly reminisces about the past, where he was fighting with a demigod while standing beside his best friend, Dumbledore. Frey will then say, "I will always be one step ahead of you, so don't worry too much." Perun turns around and says that the day we meet again, I will be ahead of you. Now we see that outside of the room, Isabelle had listened to their whole conversation. I don't know why she is crying after hearing everything. The next day, we see Frey outside, appreciating the perfect weather to leave on his journey. Isabelle arrives there and says, "Are you planning on leaving your baggage behind?" Frey says, "What are you talking about? I don't have any baggage with me." Isabelle asks, "So why did you call me with all those names before, like baggage, burden, and hindrance?" Frey asks Isabelle if she is going to follow him. "What about the academy?" Isabelle says, "I am planning on studying magic to the very limits, and history's greatest mage is before my eyes right now, so why would I take anyone else as my teacher?" Frey warns her and says she is going to regret this decision. Isabelle says that even if you were walking down the highway to hell, I would still follow you till the end. Now we see that Michael Bastard is telling the story of what happened in the banquet hall to Frey's biggest brother. But Frey's big brother acted like he didn't care about them and told Michael to get lost. But after he left the room, the brother talks with the second elder brother, Heinz, and says that it was very unexpected that Frey is a very close friend of Peru. But Heinrich replies that it would be surprising if they got close considering they both attend the same academy. The eldest brother wonders if he should report these to his father and try to use them to their advantage. Now we see that Isabel is looking at a badge and asking Frey about it. Frey tells us that he got it from Duke Shepard, or we can say Peruan's father. This badge is some sort of qualification needed to be able to take the entrance test for his circle. Isabel says that she had never even heard of the name Demigod until recently, and even in school, they were taught that the 5 heroes were the great masters who were trying to rectify the world's system. Isabel says that if it weren't for Frey, she would have never even believed in the existence of the demigods. Frey says that the scariest type of dominance is the one that is invisible to the eyes. Those under that kind of rule aren't capable of thinking for themselves and planning their future. They can only let time pass and eat what is given to them. They get drunk on the feeling of satisfaction and achievement and become happy slaves who aren't even aware that they are being controlled. That is the current situation for humanity. Frey gets angry with Isabel and asks her if she just lost against the demigod. Frey angrily says, "I never lost against him. I am in the process of winning." Fred and Isabel reach the 3rd magic tower, and Fred thinks that there is half a year left until he can join the circle. Until then, he needs to stabilize the frozen river's energy and train until he regains his original strength. Frey gets a little nostalgic and remembers how he used to fully immerse himself in magic studies at a magic tower. Suddenly, a bunch of dark elves also arrive there. Frey was quite shocked to see dark elves, but Isabel said that elves and dwarfs are species that are free to travel among human countries. Frey says that he did read about it back in the academy, but it was quite surprising to see them in person. This could never have happened 4,000 years ago. Frey remembers reading that the elves managed to completely unify, and the entire jungle in the far north is their territory. A few days have passed in the 3rd tower, and we see that Isabel has gotten used to the battling training technique now. On the other side, we see that Frey is also practicing, but it looks like he is doing some weird dance steps. An unknown man comes and comments about Frey, saying that there are many rumors about him roaming around the tower. He just performs a weird dance all day and stays in the library all night. People say that a very odd and bizarre person entered the tower. The movements done by Frey indeed look bizarre at first glance. Now that Isabel has become familiar with battling technique and can read the flow of Kai, she can see the incredible moves hidden within his dance. Frey attacks at a speed that can't be followed by the naked eye and returns to his initial position, which makes it look like a wavy and flowy dance. But in truth, it's an astonishingly high-level martial art. On the other side, we saw a man falling to the ground, and the reason for it was because he just lost against the Dark Elf in a spar. The man admits his defeat, and the Dark Elf remarks that he is a weak human. The Dark Elf's master comes from behind and says that this is a disrespectful thing to tell someone who has admitted his defeat. The Dark Elf goes and apologizes to the defeated man. The Dark Elf notices Frey doing the weird dance steps, but because he is an elf, he is able to see Frey's hidden movements. He then goes and asks Frey if he is a magic warrior, but Frey tells him that he is a magician. And it was a little hard to believe for the Dark Elf, because those aren't the movements of a magician. The Dark Elf introduces himself as Liamson, and he asks Frey to fight him. Frey gets confused as to why a Dark Elf is asking him to fight out of the blue. Liamson apologizes to him and says he didn't mean to say there was another word for it. The master of the Dark Elf comes, and Liamson also agrees that he wants to spar. The master introduces herself as Camel and greets Frey. She then points at Isabel and asks, "Who is this cute lady over there?" Isabel then introduces herself to them. Camel apologizes for disturbing Frey during the training and says you don't need to pay attention to this moron's words. Liamson starts to argue with Camel in elf language and starts asking permission to spar with Frey. Isabel, who couldn't understand the language, asked Frey what they were talking about. Frey then proceeds to speak the elf language and says he is always available for a spar. Liamson, surprisingly, says you can speak Elvish. "You are such an interesting human." Frey then replies that he could say the same about Liamson, an elf learning human magic. Liamson comments that Frey talks like the elders of their clan. Liamson now gets into the fighting position, and Frey notices the unique and elaborate movements of a dark elf. Liamson jumps and kicks, but Frey blocks the attack. They can continue to spar at an incredible speed. The spectators were shocked to see such ridiculous speed. The elves wanted to know Frey's identity, as he is fighting on an equal footing with Liamson, the next leader. Camel confirms from Frey's muscle mass that he is not a magic warrior, and she wonders how Frey blocks all of Liamson's attacks with such a skinny body. Camel then orders them to stop the spar, as both of them have been pretty much exhausted. Liamson then compliments Frey for his incredible movements, and Frey says the same. Frey says that if they were fighting in the wild at night, he would have been overpowered. Frey also asks Liamson if he is not used to hand-to-hand combat. Liamson laughs out loud and then asks Frey how long he is going to stay in these magic towers. Frey replies that he would be staying here for around a half year. Camel asks Frey why he came here to the third magic tower. Frey says there is a certain elixir that he wants to brew, so he chose the magic tower with the most specialized books. Camel says that's why you shut yourself in the library every evening. Frey says this magic tower might have been the wrong choice. I couldn't find the information I needed even after going through all the books. Camel suggests Frey read the magic books. She further says that the library is only stocked with 3rd grade books. To read grade 1 magic books, you need to pass the magic book reading rights exam and receive the recognition of 3 floor masters. Frey further asks about the exams and asks, where can I take them? Camel smiles and says that the exam is going to happen tomorrow. The next day at the exam site, people were gossiping about how Frey fought on equal footing with the Dark Elf. They were pretty amazed by the fact that a magic warrior like Frey came here to pass the exam. Camel and Liamson also arrive there, and they tell Frey that they came here to watch them. Camel then points at Liamson and says that he doesn't have anything else to do, so she brings him along. Frey also points at Isabelle and says that's the same case for her too. Liamson enthusiastically goes to Frey and says, let's fight after this exam is over. Now 3 people in white robes arrive there, and Camel tells Frey that they are the floor masters of this tower. The man in the middle is Mikkel, and he is the real deal. Mikkel announced that they wouldn't say any bullshit, and would start the exam right away. He then orders everyone to create an energy ball. He then orders me to compress the energy ball. The examinee thought that this exam was pretty simple, as it might be only the first test. Mikkel puts his hand inside his robe and takes out a marble. He then proceeds to drop a bomb and says you will pass if you compress it to a size smaller than this. Everyone tried their best to compress the energy ball, but they were all deemed failures by the examiner. We then see Isabelle struggling too much to compress the energy ball, but she was able to do so and was deemed passable by Mikkel. Mikkel then moves toward the Dark Elves, and we see that they have compressed the energy ball so much that it's barely visible. Mikkel says that there is no need for them to take the other test as they are already qualified enough. On the other side, we see that one examiner is asking Frey what he is doing by just standing there. When Mikkel noticed Frey, he was shocked, and he then told the other examiner to not rely on sight but feel the mana. Frey had compressed it to a size that is imperceptible to the human eye. Mikkel tells him too that there is no need to take any more tests, and then he notices Frey's typhoon earrings and asks to meet in private. Now we see that both of them are inside a room, all alone. Mikkel tells Frey that his skills are impressive, and he asks him why he came to the 3rd magic tower. Frey says that it was Peru's father, also known as Duke Shefford, who recommended it. Mikkel says, let's not beat around the bush. I believe that you have reached the 5-star stage. Frey agrees on this claim, but he didn't tell Mikkel that he was aiming for the 7-star stage. Mikkel asks Frey if he knows about the Demigod.